And we suppose that this today's session, which is a culmination of this course, am I right? Oh yes, very much so. Here we have the director sort of sitting privately in the corner, quietly. This is indeed the culmination. And I'm grateful to Vladimir Voinovich for attending this seminar, to tell you, for my generation, we in point of fact looked very closely at what was written, what was said, what was discussed, how this madness is translated into satire, what was said, what were the accents, the focus. I wouldn't say that we knew it all by heart, but we knew many things, and we always kept in mind what Vladimir Voinovich is doing. And then what followed was less pleasant. But at that I've seen Vladimir before, but I've never been close to him. But those people close to him are my friends. How could it happen that we're not friends? I do not know, and I'm so happy about this, because this generation to which I belong, we have experienced this violence from the state, understood something about it, and we would not want this to repeat. And our objective here is to depend transfer experience and your understanding, as you know, and we also give you this possibility to feel again some things related with a tense situation and not to fall into madness. It's very hard sometimes to resist it, but texts like the ones that Vladimir has been writing, Vladimir Voinovich has been producing, help withstand the push and understand things, because now, over lunch, he told me that whatever's going on, it's great. It's a great opportunity for satire. I don't feel it's funny, but he says it's appropriate for satire. What do you mean? You don't find it funny? What do you mean? It's not laughable. Very much laughable when, for example, I read several sentences that the deputies of the State Duma utter, or the laws that are being decreed. Sometimes, yes, it is laughable. We must just put it down and put it into the book without amending anything. We don't even have to invent anything. Right now, I would like, when I was on the road, I didn't know what I would do. I still would do, and then I never gave me an explanation. So, take me what I am, and what I am, and I don't know. The thing is that I thought that maybe I should read out some things that I've written, or I may have a talk, or we may have the both, if you will. Okay, let's combine. Okay, let's try to combine. Well, in literature, I've been for several years now, and many people were born and lived their lives and even died, and I'm still around. And I'm still trying to do something about it. So I've worked in all the genres that exist. I wrote poems, poetry, short stories, novels, plays, sketches, tales. Yes, anthem. Yes, I've written an anthem of the astronauts and the anthem of Russia, which for the vote was not accepted, but 23 deputies voted, although it's satirical. And 23 deputies of the State Duma voted for it. And besides, I wrote quite a lot of things for the newspapers, and for a while I've spoken around when I had to emigrate. I spoke quite frequently on radio, Svoboda, freedom. And every Saturday I had these radio presentations for 10 minutes. This is where I spoke, and I found for myself a genre that I thought, what do Soviet people need to hear? Do they want to hear about the West? I thought, no. I'd rather tell them about themselves, because I realized, especially when I found myself in the West, and used to suspect that Soviet people do not know anything about themselves, and I began to tell them about themselves. And I had many articles, and I'm accustomed to accept taking my publications as something where I explain to people that 2 multiplied by 2 is 4. So now I thought I would write an article how to compare our society with Western society, or with any European, Western European country, and to America, and to quite the opposite to Japan. This country and the procedures and orders that is typical of this country, public order that is typical of this country. So when we live our lives, if you look at the face of it, our life is almost very much like the West. The state, the structure, we have the president, we have the parliament, we have elections, we've got, what have we got else? We've got all kinds of freedoms. And, but almost all that the West has, but just this word almost, nearly, in some places it shows itself quite clearly. For a normal person, this nearly almost, he seems to have enough. He works, he goes to work, he makes money. When he gets retired, he will qualify for a pension, he's the breadwinner, he can enjoy the freedoms that they have. For example, travel abroad, which Soviet people didn't know. And you can now travel to Turkey, and if you can afford it, you can travel to Nice or to the Maldives or whatever. That seems to be the face of it, but this freedom is certainly there. But the freedom of choice, well, choice certainly is what we have, and everybody knows what elections we have. But anyways, every person can choose either option, either to vote to these elections or not. I usually choose not to vote, because I know that if I go to elections, nevertheless, I will, whatever I do there at the voting pool, certainly the parliament will be made up of these 4 parties, and I didn't vote for either. I do not see any difference whatsoever between the 4, that's why I don't go to elections. And as to humans, anybody, just people in the street, they seem to be happy about this. There's no freedom of speech, but they don't need it. Why does they need it? They just watch television, some soap operas, they watch, say, talk shows, and he seems to be fine. Freedom of speech, as it turns out, is needed by very few people. Actually, it's needed by everybody, but most people do not understand that they need it, and they never perceive this absence or this loss. And things seem to be going fine. Every person seems to be doing fine. Before we see some kind of, I do not know, something happens. Say, just somebody is driving their Zhiguli and crosses crossroads, and he's hit by Mercedes that drove with the red light on, and there is a government official there or a deputy who is driving, and it turns out that the person who was driving the cheap Zhiguli with the green light on, it turns out that it was he who actually hit the Mercedes. He was not the victim, but the perpetrator of the road accident. And he has to fight hard and long to really make sure, and he has to go up and probably talk to Ludmila Mikhailovna Alexeyeva, and she may tell about it to the president, and she will say about it to the president, and the president will put it in his notebook, but nothing much will happen. And you've seen that if we had had a true democracy, then we could have some deputies who probably would have spoken for these Zhiguli owner. Newspapers would probably write about that case. But if not, this person remains alone against the state and nobody can help him. But more important things happen. A case takes place that has international repercussions. Say, in a neighboring country, we see some events taking place, and And our country, and the leadership of our country, decide that we need to intervene here. And then the president, as you know, demands that he requests the endorsement of the Council of the Federation. You see, we have democracy. He has to ask for the permit of the Council of Federation. He can't do away without it. So he asks for a permit, and then thinks maybe they might refuse him. Maybe he's reluctant. Maybe think, may I ask for a permit? What if they say no? Then I will say, oh, thank goodness. For some reason, I say, yes, you can. 100% vote for it and say, hey, come on, yes. If you want to start your work, come on. And we just applaud you. And this is where the difference begins. Because if we had lived in a country that would not be an almost democracy, but without this almost, without this tiny word almost, then, okay, the president decided that we need to intervene. They would say, look, it's a serious matter. It's really serious. The country wants to bring troops into the country and find some activity and start some hostilities which are dangerous for the country per se. It cannot be that somebody will vote 100% in favor and improve. Somebody might object quite sharply, somebody might sort of abstain, but this is not what happens. And the country gets involved into a situation. And then the Crimea, yes, come on, let's grab Crimea, let's seize Crimea, or let's any other peninsula. To make my story an allegory. But as a result, so later on, for that matter, if we indeed lived in a country that was not merely democratic, but truly democratic, where there is true freedom of speech, there are independent branches of government, that might not necessarily take place, because many people would say, okay, we will seize Crimea. What would follow is that we might have, say, in the southeast, some things might happen, and this really started. It was not really worth much. That could be foreseen. And if we approve, then what follows is that, and some people think, okay, what if Ukrainians had said, had renounced on Donetsk and Lugansk, nothing much would have happened, and I would tell you about Donetsk and Lugansk, and the war would continue in Kharkov and Dnipropetrovsk. But if they say surrendered in Kharkov and Dnipropetrovsk and Kyiv or whatever, so you see, all this happens because we have this word almost. This word is an almost democratical, almost all institutions are there. We've got all institution in takes, but they do something, but some ritual role that they play. We've got the parliament, we've got the courts of justice, we've got the constitutional court, Supreme Court. They all are performing some roles. Judges are wearing mantles, but they all are performing whatever the instructions they hear from the top. And as a result, right now, in this situation we find ourselves in this way or other, we are involved in a war which, amongst other things, let alone about humane considerations, there are many citizens of Ukraine that are dying, also Russian citizens are dying. And if we speak about economic consequences, I'm not speaking about sanctions against us and leaving them alone. But even so, the very fact this really is worth a lot of money, and the Crimea also is worth a lot. But the thing is that if we had a normal democratic state, then the Crimea, then it doesn't matter whom it belongs to. In Europe, they decided a long ago that they don't need to fight wars because of territories. And there are Alsace and the Lorraine, for which Germany and France fought. There's no argument whatsoever, it now belongs to France, and let it be. And any German, if he wants to travel there, he will travel. And the Crimea, for that matter, it was never barred. It doesn't belong to any of us, but we could very well travel there. Like 2 years ago, I travelled to Crimea and I took my vacation there. And if I travel, I will certainly feel that better. And in the same way, and if, for that matter, if we were a democratic state, then we would not need to fear the expansion of NATO, for example, because we already noticed that countries with sustainable democracy of the European type, they do not really wage wars between themselves. What they have, they've got some like wars like England with Iceland because of herring. But these wars are figural, are virtual rather. And real wars do not take place. There are disputes which are resolved in some manner or other. Then we would not need to fear, and we should not fear that NATO would enter the Black Sea, but they won't even do so because they wouldn't need anything to do so. Then our society would be more democratic, and we'd be much better off, and we would not really lose money. We now have to buy the Mistral, or whatever. Why the hell we would need them then, if we had a truly democratic society? This is in brief what I wanted to, I recited to you what I wrote for the papers, and if you will, I shall read out a short piece I've written. I don't like this word, this piece, but I told you that I've already worked in many genres, and I used to write tales for adults, and now I want to read you a tale, if I may. Yes, forgive me. I told you that I'm writing, always keep proving that 2 by 2 is 4. I know we have people who are enlightened, and maybe you need some more sophisticated in geometry cases, but I do not know them. I'm sorry about that. I can only speak at the level I can master. This is what I told you about the current status quo, about the current situation, about the status quo. Well, this tale is called about silly Galileo. In some kingdom, in a certain planet that was named, for argument's sake, the Earth, a young, promising and very clever astronomer lived, and his name was, say, Galileo. I will have a qualification that he is a fairy tale Galileo, and his biography doesn't coincide fully with the historical Galileo, although it does coincide in part. He lived in a state where people worked hard day and night, would sow bread, make steel, produce coal, sing songs, and speak at rallies and meetings. But he didn't sing songs, he didn't want to fight, he didn't attend the rallies, and actually from the government perspective he did things which were completely silly. The silliness was all about Galileo at nights, as he neglected, for that matter, his spousal duties, would sit in his observatory and would stare at the sky and the stars through a tube that is called telescope. And it didn't just stare, hoping to surprise everybody around him and invent things which people could not even think of. And not just stare, but stared in a hope to surprise the world and invent some things that nobody else could think of. And then he did invent such things. And in the morning he went to his wife, and she just has had her breakfast and started to wash the linen. "Come on, dear," he writes to her, "you know how smart I am. Do you know what a discovery I made?" "No, you do not know. You cannot even imagine what things I discovered. You know, I made such a remarkable discovery, which even Ptolemaeus could not discover. I discovered that our planet is round and it rotates. It orbits, it rotates around its axis, and it also orbits the sky. The sun, sorry. Galileo thought that his wife, once she heard it, would immediately embrace him and say, "Oh, my darling, you're a man of genius, what a discovery. For good reason I married you, and I'm so happy with your small salary. I spend my nights alone." Not at all. He didn't ever receive it. His wife, instead of embracing him and saying such words, instead she smashed him, boxed him with his red long jaws and says, "Stop saying rubbish to me about the rotation of the earth and other things. I know what you're doing. You're not staring at the stars. You're staring as your PhD student read." Well, women can be like this. And no discovery, whatever you make, they always tend to have their own evaluation of the situation. Had the wife of Galileo understood that he had indeed made a great discovery, maybe he would have, once he has told her, would stop discussing it with somebody else. But here he got very upset, never getting his support, and got into a trattoria. There, as usual, he drank something and kept boasting how smart he was, how he discovered that the Earth is round, and it rotates around its axis, and it orbits this star, and we are flying in the space, God knows where. But all kinds of people attend the trattoria. Some people disregarded his words. Some people laughed at his, thinking, "Oh, look, the man has had too much." And certainly a sex informer who immediately took note of what the astronomer said and immediately reported him to the Holy Inquisition. The Inquisition could not leave unattended such a piece of information, and then he gets summons to report with, for the first time he was invited for interrogation. As we know, historical Galileo, they showed him the objects of torture, after which he said, "No, it doesn't orbit the sky," but when he left the Inquisition, he insisted that it rotated, but I'm not writing history here, I'm writing fairy tales, and in my fairy tale things went the other way around. In my fairy tales, they were not torture weapons. The main Inquisitioner, a very polite and contemporary person, when an astronomer comes to see him, that man meets him in his office, hugs him, and says, "Come on, hello, Galileo Galilevich, I'm so happy to see you today. How are you? How's your wife? How are your kids? Is everything all right? I'm so happy for you. Would you like a cup of coffee, please?" They brought them coffee. "Okay, come on," says the Inquisitioner. "Take your cup of coffee. Enjoy it, please. Would you want sugar, milk, and maybe gingerbread? Well, I've invited you for a matter which is such a trifle. We will now look into this matter, and we shall both go home, each of us." "But what is it all about?" Galileo asks. "Oh, there's not anything the matter at all. We've just heard our office received some signals from our people that you seem to be professing something that is pseudo-scientific and a rotten theory, which is not typical of our people. So to say that the Earth is very much like the soccer ball, and so very much like it orbits the sky. But I certainly do not believe it, but we hear these signals and we have to respond to them and hear whether you want to trust it or not. There is nothing to believe or not." Galileo says, "The thing is that it is indeed like a ball, and it orbits the sky, and it orbits it, how shall I put it, in two months. It seems to be rotating around its axis and also orbits the sky," and this is where he wants to explain how the season changes it. Senor El Inquisitor listens to him very politely and smiles, and then Galileo Galilei asks, "Tell me please, have you seen the psychiatrist recently?" "I'm very sorry, I didn't get your point." The astronomer says, "Well, come on, how can it be that the Earth could orbit the sky or the sun? Well, you think if it were like a soccer ball, we would have fallen off it and would have flown, God knows, upside down." Galileo began to explain something about the force of magnetism and gravity, and about the forces of gravity, but the Inquisitioner just waved his hand, says, "Come on, do go home, but think hard. And for that matter, talk to your wife. She's a wise woman, a sensible woman. She will explain to you whether the Earth orbits the sun or not." Okay, Galileo returns home to his wife, and she was mopping the floors. "Well, come on, again you've been staring at the sky and the stars." And again she hit him hard. in his groin, and he got upset and told her he was not in the observatory, that he had been to the Inquisition, and that they told him to go back home and talk to his wife. When his wife heard the word Inquisition, she realized that things were quite serious and bad, and she thought it was much worse than her husband chasing his PhD student.
And began interrogating him, how he had come with such rubbish things, and began telling him her very detailed, and okay, said he, why, perhaps you're right, and Earth is orbiting, but what is your benefit? It's not that benefit that matters, explains Galileo, it's scientific truth, and I'm a scientist that cannot give up the truth. And wife says that it's quite serious, stopped fighting, began talking him into not doing such discoveries which bring only harm. Okay, let it orbit, and you just sit and keep silent, and it will not stop orbiting because of that and will not become square. Then Galileo got angry and began saying some very pompous things about adherence to his principles and convictions, about the conscience of a scientist, about the responsibility before the next generations, and so forth and so forth. The wife spent a lot of words to talk him into giving up that particular theory and forgive him for flirting with young girls. And she tried to, but Galileo was stubborn, and he didn't give way. Some time passed. Earth kept on orbiting, and around the sun, the day replaced the night. Summer changed winter, and Galatians' family became worse and worse. And not only the family, Galileo began noticing that in office, his superiors treated him worse and worse. Neighbors didn't say hello, friends did not call, and when they met him accidentally, they changed their direction. The girl changed the thesis title and changed the supervisor. Galileo thought that trouble was coming, but couldn't help it. And then finally, Galileo was invited to the main astronomical department to discuss him. And all brightest scientists came together and began studying. The main astronomer made a report that the seniors from some time in our very healthy organization, we saw some unhealthy people. Our employee Galileo spreading some harmful gossips. He's claiming that the Earth we live on is just a ball which is orbiting like a toy. So I would ask our distinguished scholars to speak on that. And scholars began coming to the microphone. As the records read later, they took very emotional and very dedicated speeches. One of the speakers said a long time about the permanent foundations of Ptolemy teaching. The other talked about the international situation, claiming that any departure from the invincible principles will play into the hands of our enemies and increase the danger of war. Juliet also took part in the discussion, and she paid attention to the company, to the lower morale of the youth, as featuring pacifism, alcoholism, drug addiction, and as a result, extramarital sexual intercourse and reduction of birth rate. And Juliet believed that partially it was because of that immature theories like the one of Galileo. And Juliet said if it is round, if Earth is round, if it is orbiting, then everything is allowed, and we don't have any solid foundations. You can kill be engaged in lust, steal, lie, and everything. And Galileo was reminded that this is the country, the Earth, that fed him from the very birth, clothed him, but Galileo was very stubborn, and he didn't want to try to give up his idea, supported by his henchmen from aboard. He wouldn't listen to his comrades. He was arrogant, and he believed he was too smart. Another astronomer spoke of Galileo very briefly. He said, personally, I would so-called scholars had executed. And he was applauded when he was leaving the podium. So the chief astronomer spoke again. He said, I'm glad that we had such an emotional meeting. Brother scholars tried to help Galileo to realize he was wrong. Galileo, please come to the podium. Be courageous, confess sins and mistakes, and they will be forgiven. But Galileo refused to come to the podium. He was not very much courageous. He tried to shirk responsibility. He was mumbling something about Earth's orbiting. He said that he was telling that Earth was orbiting because it's scientifically true. And then he smiled and said, no matter what you say, no matter what you do to me, she's orbiting. It is orbiting. And certainly it broke the patience, and Galileo was fired. And the highest Inquisition began investigating his case again. The sun turned to Earth by the other side, so night came, and the black raven carriage came to Galileo home and took him far, far away to prison. He sits in prison, and Earth is orbiting, and everything on Earth, fields, gardens, cows, prisons, are orbiting too. A single time a day around its axis, and one time a year around the sun. In prison, Galileo got old, his wife married again, and his kids changed their last names not to spoil their careers, and Galileo kept on being in prison. He said, okay, it doesn't matter that my wife gave me up, as well as my kids. It's okay that I'm in prison, but I remained to be adherent to my principle, and the Earth keeps on orbiting. And sooner or later, everybody will have to admit that I was very smart. And as greatest scholars, Galileo got right. Because of the orbiting of Earth, time came when those wise and smart people dedicated by the resolution of the government, they recognized that the Earth was round and it's orbiting around its axis and around the Sun. And the astronomer, this descent astronomer, was pardoned and was relieved from prison, but without any retirement age. So he was walking around along the street, and there was a young boy coming in his direction with holding a globe and singing a song. Galileo stopped him and asked, what is it? And the boy willingly explained that it was a globe, it's a model Earth, that is a ball, and it is orbiting in this way. Okay, said Galileo, is it round? Is it orbiting? And he asked the boy if he knew who had said that first. Yes, I know. It was Galileo who said it first. Galileo? Asked the science scholar with some tremor. He was very clever. No, he wasn't. There is also a song about him that Galileo in the world, he counted stars and was very foolish. Well, how can you call Galileo a fool if he was the first to say that? But that's exactly why he fool is. It's not the smart person is not the one who says this first, but the one who says this on time. And the boy walked away. Galileo turned around, looked at that boy, and began weeping, began crying, because he believed that his life was in vain, because only at the end of his life he learned the truth, which others learn when they are still young. Anything else? Any other fairy tale? Okay, if you don't mind, I'll think of something else. But as I understand, it reflects our reality, partially the reality of the past and partially the reality of the upcoming times. So, here is another story. That's a new fairy tale of the Naked King. In some kingdom, there used to be a king that had Hans Christian Andersen had described before me, the king that walked naked for quite some time. Even Andersen passed away, but the king kept on walking naked from year to year. The king was walking naked, and the king's guard has following him, saying that the king has a new dress, a wonderful dress, better than anybody has. So other kings, they walk naked or in some very bad clothes, but our king is dressed very smartly. All people in the kingdom knew that and confirmed that at every opportunity. In even days, on uneven days, so the subjects came to rallies and meetings and unanimously admired the dress of their beloved king. Although that dress was really great, people of the kingdom solemnly promised that very soon a king will get a dress even better than this one. There are certainly some black sheep in the family, and in king's relations were some people who used to say that the dress is not that good and that the king could be dressed even better. But guards and the secret police resorted to very harsh means to treat them. Some of them were put in chains, others were stacked and put on gallows. And despite that, those crimes kept on emerging. Sometimes it looked like everything was very calm and everybody admired the king's new dress. But then some silly boy comes and shouts that the king is naked. That boy must have read Hans Christian Andersen, and that boy believed that the moment he shouts that, people would really notice that the king is naked and begin thanking the boy for giving them a hint. So there could be another Andersen who would write a fairy tale about that boy, and the boy didn't know that it's not Andersen's stories that guide the life of the kingdom, but those of Karl Marx. And King's voice is something that you can only hear in distance, and the moment the boy says something, then the guard would take him and they would take him away, and people say, you are to blame, you're guilty himself. You don't have to say those things. We all know that the king is naked, but why should you shout at them? That tough measures resulted in very positive things. The number of those silly boys was reducing with every passing year. Some of them were wiped by the parents. Others got smarter and just realized that you can express your thoughts in a different way, in a hazardous way and in a safe way. You can shout that the king is naked, meaning that he is naked. And you can also shout that the king is dressed very smartly. And as a result, in the kingdom, the art of reverse comprehension has developed quite appropriately. And even some subjects meeting each other ask each other if they saw that the king was dressed so smartly. The other began roaring and laughing, and that meant that they both understood that the king had no dress at all, and the other could have add that I think that today's dress is even smarter than the yesterday's, and then began laughing even stronger. Writers in the kingdom were also quite smart. There were right ear writers who wrote through their right ear. So they wrote, for instance, like this: in our kingdom and beyond that and throughout the world, all people know that the best dress is worn by our beloved king. And people reading such words were indignant inside them, calling it a lie and throwing those books away. But again, they throw them away just virtually, and left ear writers, they wrote through left ear, But they repeated the same words as right ear writers, but they meant the opposite. And people, while reading same words, were also laughing, and then gave those books from one to another, rewrote those books, and learned them even by heart. As time passed by, the difference between left and right ear writers was eroded, so even specialists reading those books couldn't understand what the difference was between right and left ear writers. More so that it was known that right ear writers, from tactical reasons, pretended to be left ear writers, while left ear writers pretended to be right ear writers. Foreigners visiting the kingdom reported in their media those things, and were struck that this reversal comprehension was inherited by the subjects of the kingdom. But it all started from the new dress of the king, and it was believed that those who praised the dress were telling truth, and while others who condemned that dress, same lie, and gradually they changed the notions entirely, and it was an absolute mess. If a person was told that it's warm in the street, the person put on something warm, and if he was told that it was cold, that person put on a very light dress. So time passed by, nothing changed there, so the king still looked naked, getting older. Or as interpreted into the local language, he was getting much younger. And the more older he got, the younger he got, his health was deteriorating, and in speaking in the local language, it was getting better. So much that he had in sequence some flu or sore throat. So finally, ministers got together to discuss things and what decide what to do. First minister said, certainly the king has a very smart dress, but since times go to the opposite direction and sometimes we have cooler periods, meaning warmer periods, I believe that some new dress is to be made for the king so that he put it on top of the old one. Perhaps it may not be that elegant or smart, but still the king will feel cool or warm in there, wherever there. But the Minister of Ideology said they cannot do that. If we make a new dress for the king, people will decide that the old dress was not a dress. So they may say that the king was naked, so I suggest we don't make any new dress. The Minister of Cotton Industry said that for the new dress we have too much cotton or too much paper, meaning that we have neither. The Minister of Secret Police didn't say anything, and he was just taking notes because he had some paper. So they thought very hard and decided that the catastrophic situation in the kingdom could be explained by the fact that they were telling only the truth, meaning that all lied. Let's come back to the genuine meanings, and perhaps we'll start calling the black color perhaps not black straight, but blue, red, or something else. And we will also differentiate between lie, one truth. Truth could be full truth, relative truth, half truth, and other things. So there will be a gradient transition. So that's what ministers decided and announced about their decision to the people. And the kingdom welcomed that statement because people got so much tired of that truth, which was lie, and they began telling lie that was truth. They could, but their tongues were not moving. They could not pronounce those things because they were accustomed to saying things about things upside down, but they couldn't reverse back. And so in media and speakers said that this is because of some negative trends. In the past 20 years, the king has been dressed not quite properly. Earlier, we said and claimed that the king was dressed the best of all, but it's not the case. So, again, but speeches were not uniform. Others say that our king had a good dress earlier, and now he's also well dressed. Perhaps some disorder is there, but it can happen to everyone. And if some great disorder took place, then anyway, why should we recall that bad event? Others were more critical and said that we have to tell all the truth, and we should say that our king is not properly dressed, and maybe he's not dressed at all. And people were talking about that quite freely. No guards captured them, and there were no guards at all, except for secret agents. They were visible, but they tried hard to pretend that they were also conventional people. Citizens of the kingdom kept on discussing flaws of king's dress, and king was working among them and condemned them, but he was very old. He suffered from 3 diseases at a time, and he wanted some of the people to note that he was absolutely naked. He wanted a silly boy to come and shout about that, but there were no more silly boys, and they were quite smart. At minimum, they were ready to discuss the quality of the king's dress, but its absence. And then the king couldn't stand it any longer and began shouting himself, "The king is naked," he shouted that 3 times. But the 3rd time, people got very frightened and decided to leave that King's Square with the fear that, out of the fear that could be called witnesses. Guards started on that king, believing that he is another silly boy. But when they realized that it was the king, they got lost and didn't know what to do. And that king, the silly boy, finally came and began shouting, "King is naked," and he shouted that 10 times, and then tens and hundreds of other silly boys came shouting that, and the guards, seeing that they are so many, they were afraid to attack them. More so that the king himself admitted he was naked. Since then, you can say anything you like in that kingdom, even that the king is naked, but nobody pays attention. And the king is still walking naked because that new dress is still not made. For some time, they don't have good fabric, or they cannot find skillful tailors, and they cannot allow a bad tailor to make a dress. So he keeps on walking naked, and you can talk about that indefinitely. People did exactly the same that for some time. They gathered at the squares, went to the rally, shouted that the king was naked, and they were singing dirty songs about that. And then they were bored with that, and the life in the kingdom became bored too. Earlier, people enjoyed watching naked king and shouting about that his nice dress. They realized that there was no dress, and they laughed when they really talked to each other between the lines, and they admired the books written by writers writing praises to the king. And they also left the books of left-ear writers who wrote their books in the opposite sense. And so now people believe that in the earlier times life had been much better. Thank you very much, and I'll read a piece of lyrics to you, and that will be it. not long ago, and people had very little room to live. Climate was very severe, just winter. We were short of light and warmth. You cannot distinguish between night and day. People just walk trying to feel objects around, but they hate each other. They are soaked with piss and smelling it, and they got dried like some plant in a desert. And the only joy was when some neighbor feels bad, no matter if leg is broken or purse is stolen, or perhaps there are some other problems. But if neighbors have some problems, if they are bad, then it entertains you. No more entertainments for your heart and soul. But if somebody you kill, if you kill somebody, then certainly that makes it different. Stas believes that some questions should be asked. Your question, please. Please introduce yourself. Good evening. I am Bernard from Poland, from Warsaw. My question is as follows. I wonder if Russia survived in 2042 in this current shape. The matter is that we have yet to reach the quality of life that I described in 2042, and so we shall live and wait. Ruslan Tsarov from Ukraine. Vladimir Nikolaevich, I'm familiar with your books quite well, and you are the person who has experience of living in modern Germany, and you know something about Ukraine. For Germany, the turning point was its defeat in World War II, and if it had not been for that, we might have not seen that wonderful country now. And given the today's situation in the Russian-Ukrainian relations, in Russia, to do away with this imperial level, same kind of trouble is required, or they can do without that? I think I didn't quite accurately answer the first question. I meant that things that are happening in Ukraine now, and given the fact that Russia is involved in the conflict in one way or another, although the official position is that it's not the case, but we have some evidence that the presence is there. In my non-fiction accounts, I wrote that if war continues and if Russia and Ukraine are involved in that fully, both countries will collapse. Some people believe that Russia is much more powerful than Ukraine and nothing happens to that. But it does, and Russia will also disintegrate. And if it happens, there will be some country will go into pieces, and perhaps finally those pieces, those parts will live normal human life. But I wish that normal human life was seen would be seen throughout the territory. So if in my presentation I said nearly or almost, and if we could delete that nearly or almost, if we can really turn away from that managed democracy. And speaking of that, Russian power finds itself in a great stampede or a deadlock, and they are in a worse situation, and Putin's situation is even worse than that of Poroshenko. To head or to be in a defending country, you feel even better than you had a country that is on offensive. But anyway, I think the leadership is in the stampede. They got into that, and those volunteers or separatists. Separatists sometimes are thought to be something bad, but those separatists mean that those are the people who try to separate some territory from another, and it doesn't mean anything bad. And those separatists were promised some support, and Russia now is in a situation that it cannot provide that support. And people in southwestern Ukraine are very much disappointed because they believed that the support had been promised.
Now, 87% of those who support the Russian president, when a good part of these people realized that Russia did not, in fact, render the support to these secessionist forces, then indeed they would be disenchanted. And in a democratic arrangement, this would have led to elections, and the government would have changed. And the story would have ended. But in today's environment, this is not likely to happen. So the whole situation is quite risky, not only to the Ukraine, but also to Russia. I might have given a more extended answer than your question was. Natalia Nazarov, alumnus of 2011, Penza region. Penza. Thank you very much for your fairy tales, and when you recited them and spoke about democracy, I remembered the film by Mark Zakharov, To Kill the Dragon. This was in a way close to what you read, and I changed my civic position, and indeed the dragon is in everybody's head, and unless we remove this dragon, nothing would change. How do you deal with this? How have you gotten rid of this dragon? Well, I think that if there had been a democracy within myself, I would have been a schizophrenic. This is what was once said by Naum Karjavin. If you have a plurality or pluralism within one head, this is schizophrenia. But as far as Russia is concerned, I agree with you. It's not just about one dragon, because there are some bold people who go to the rallies and say down with Putin or Russia without Putin. It's not just about Putin, but the whole system. If you take out Putin and get Zhirinovsky or put Zyuganov, they're all people of that system, and every one of them will rule in the same way. So you have to have the system somehow reformed. Otherwise, if I may express my opinion, I think that people speak with great terror about the revolution. The color revolution in Kiev, people voted, and some of the local officials and people revolted, and the president was not particularly successful. This was all about that's all about the revolution. The revolution can be a velvet, it can be and the revolution is required for every society. But as President Kennedy said, those who do not make a peaceful revolution can take to a bloody revolution. So And when such problems are not solved, then indeed it becomes almost unavoidable. When there's some tragedy, and then as a result of war, as a result of sanctions, something is in shortage, and the people may start to the streets, and then there may be a revolt. But the revolutions are different, and when we speak about the revolution, I am speaking as a meteorologist, and I'm not calling to a revolution. There's not, and we don't see a revolutionary situation in this society, because this society, in spite of you, and there are quite a few of you, many of you, compared to the time when I was at your age, because at that time we only had some dissidents like Lyudmila Mikhailovna, and these were people or small groups of people. However, we don't have a true civil society today. In spite of your school, in spite of, I'm not disparaging your efforts, and I think that the civil society is developing, but it has not gotten to the requisite level. Mr. Alexander Chernov, City of Bryansk. With the knowledge of your biography, your fairy tale about Galileo may well be based on your personal experience. But indeed, do you share the views of such persons as Galileo from your fairy tale? How conscious is their choice? And maybe it is better to be as wise as the boy that whom he met after prison. One of the reasons why I ask this question is that I remember my school, and with even my good marks, I was expelled from the school twice because of dissidents. They even had big councils of professors and wanted to kick me out. And last year I met the director of my school, with whom I had very good relations afterwards. She said to me that she is very sorry, and she said she was very sorry that they wanted to kick me out. Of course, I liked her, but indeed, why did I need that? Well, I think that Galileo thinks every now and then, why does he need it? And I think that the society needs such people.
Который знает, что сказать нужно вовремя, а в свое время говорить нет. Но, конечно, люди, которые существуют в таком обществе, люди, первооткрыватели, и те, которые
And those, the pioneers of us, those who believe that the discovery of the truth is important as much as the taking this truth down to the people. There are not many of us, and some of such people may be called very free. Some are free on the inside, but they pay with a real freedom. But the world would have been isolated if the world had consisted of such boys. We would not have gone to electricity, to the computers, to the motor cars, to the internal combustion engines, or even to the carriages. Thank you very much. Thank you for your response. You know that we have the executive director, Marina Efremova. I introduced her to you. She's on holidays and she's with 2 kids in St. Petersburg, and she's writing to Vladimir. How well said. She's from St. Petersburg. She's watching the broadcast of this conference. Everybody watches this. This is all right. That's great. Anton Khvostov from Saratov. I have a rhetoric question. Why is it that the most intellectuals are usually at the side of the victors or the government? Well, I think that those who are on the side of the government are not the intelligentsia. That's my very short answer. Tatiana Kankova from the Moscow region. Thank you very much, Mr. Voinovich. Thank you for making us smile. Thank you for giving us this smile. And what I would like to ask you about is that you might, you know that in Koktebel in Crimea, there's a place which is very important to all those who write in Russian, the house of Voloshin. I used to go there every year to the International Voloshin's Literary Forum. People from the Ukraine, from the Baltic States, from America, from Georgia came there every year. And I think for the first time for this place, because Maximilian Voloshin did not differentiate between the Reds and the Whites, and when people needed his help, he helped every person who came to his house. And now it happens that this literary community is split, and I understand myself that I will not and I cannot go there to this place, and it is very a great tragedy, and I understand that Maximilian Voloshin would have found for himself the resolution of this dilemma, and I can't. What can you say to this? Do you believe that literature can be a unifying force in this world with the tissues broken and cut? Well, I think that the Russian literature, all Russian literature, is so grand that I think that the Russian literature is the most humane literature in the world, partially because other countries have never required such humanitarian injections. And unfortunately, I never thought about myself. I never, in this sense, I never had any ambitions with respect to what I wrote. But I think that our literature does not have much influence on our morals. Although there is a big number of people who have been influenced by the literature, but it is still a layer of people. It is not omnipresent influence either in the society at large or within the government, and neither today nor under the Tsars. But probably the Tsars' government here was the most enlightened government. If I may introduce to you our great expert and author, Ekaterina Shulman. She speaks about Parliament, she writes about state matters, and she says that this Parliament does exist. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction. I would like to ask a question which is not in any way related to the parliamentarism. Your works, both Moscow 2040 and The Adventures of Private Chonkin, are satiric. They are satire. Do you believe, do you share a widespread opinion that the outside pressure, such as censorship and animosity or hostility on the part of the state, may foster the development of literary talent, and or else this may talent may only be cultivated in isolation? Do you think that such harsh environment is in any way conducive? Well, maybe there are different kinds of pressure. The writer is on the one hand a very capricious plant or flower. On the other side, it may even get through the asphalt. In some cases, this influence may be limited or qualified. For instance, this is what we saw under Nicholas I or later in the 19th century. So even though there was censorship and there was no freedom, but there was enough freedom. But under Stalin, there was a time, and when they speak about Stalin, Stalin's time was an absolute dead time, and even though the Silver Age was coming from the previous epoch and starting from the beginning of the 30s up until the end of Stalin's life, there was no literature whatsoever. It literally disappeared. For this very reason, literature makes a choice. That's why when the Khrushchev's thaw came, it seemed that there's a great blossoming. But compared to Stalin's time, the time of Khrushchev's thaw was viewed as and indeed a step forward. It is like people who were sitting in the cell without even a window open, and then suddenly the window shutter was opened and people could gulp of fresh air. So indeed, strong pressure, of course, is contradictory. But then, indeed, of the modern authors, would you call any talented authors? But frankly, I don't like to speak about this. I'm sorry, I don't like to talk about this in public because this might view or sound as a qualification. Nothing about Parliament, by the way. Is there anything you wanted to say about? Nothing good about the Parliament in your question. We'll talk about this in private. All right, thanks. Timur Ozhakov from English Republic. Thank you very much. From Ingushetia, thank you for this literally this evening of high literature. I tended to agree that when you read the story of Galileo, but when you talked about the role of such people, I think that boy was wrong, because there must be somebody who launches a mechanism, and the word said in the right time is for special purposes. Well, do you really think that I think as that boy? I lived a life which was quite different from this boy, but what I want to say is that we're talking about the society. We're talking about the life in the society, and we live in these in the society which may or may not be called humane. Talking of these emperors without cloths, how burdened they are by their lot. Well, I cannot say. Maybe they don't even feel that they are without clothes. I don't know. Difficult to say. Maybe they are afraid. Generally, they have a great fear. The fear that that the people would open their eyes and see them without clothes. So this is the point of Andersen's fairy tale, anyway. Stanislav Klazowski from St. Petersburg. We celebrated the beginning of World War I yesterday. In the beginning of this event of momentous importance, Vladimir Lenin, when he spoke about the policies of Bolsheviks, he said that the worse the better. The worse it is, the better it is. We want our country to be defeated, for this war to become a civil war from an imperialist war. Well, of course, there are a lot of parallels with respect to August 1914, and if I may get myself tuned to your phrase, which might have been uncautious, when you said that the sanctions may take the people to the streets. And my first question, what do you mean by the change of the system? And secondly, do you believe that we should wish Russia to have Russia defeated? Well, I'm shocked by this aggression. Of course, you have to. Why do we need this? Why do we need this escalation of hate? We lived. I read TV broadcasts on the Russian TV channels and the Ukrainian TV channels, and I can see that this bigotry, hypocrisy, and the terrible admixture of hate speech and sentimental maudlin talk. So in one podcast they can say that we will get to Lviv, to Lvov, and others would say that this is our brotherly or fraternal Ukrainian people or nation. So I think that this degree of hate has gone up to an inconceivable degree, even though these are two peoples which we didn't much differentiate between each other for a long time. So, with respect to the people who may take to the streets, then I think, and if there is a revolt, the government may change, but this regime may change for an even worse regime. So, but the actual defense can be seen in a democratic arrangement or a democratic system. If you don't like the government, then you may vote and change this government. If there is no way to oust the government, if there is no way to change the people in power, then indeed we find ourselves in a situation when the government may change in a coup of violence, which is certainly not something I might want, but something that might happen. Alexandra Zarkina. I'm from Simferopol, from Ukraine, and I have long thought about asking a question. I want to thank you with great. I want to thank you with great and for this speech of courage, Yulia. Yulia Sheslivtseva, alumnus of the school, thank you for your presentation and your fairy tales. The top secret newspaper has recently published a new version of the court-martial play that you wrote about 20 years ago and that you have gone back to. Could it be that this play will eventually be staged? Well, this play, the court-martial play, is about a man who comes to a theater, and there is some meeting at the stage, and he asks, what are you playing here? What are your roles? And one of these people said that I am the chairman of the court-martial, and so why are you going to court-martial? It really doesn't matter. We might court-martial you. And it turns out that he so indeed I wrote this play towards the end of the Soviet era, and I thought that that time may be gone, but indeed it was not gone. I could see what is happening with the Bolotna Square, what happens, and I thought to myself, no, it has not changed in any way. And I tried to adapt the play to the modern times. And there's a theatre in Moscow by the Kursk railway station, and I harbor hope that it will be staged at this theatre, which is called The Courage, or Courage in the French version. Artyom Filatov from St. Petersburg. Kornei Chukovsky, the Russian poet and writer, said that one has to live long in Russia, and that the dusk gets thicker before the dawn. Indeed, one thinks, are we to see the dawn, or will the darkness be thicker? You've lived a long time in this country, but my question is, what gives you hope? What could you tell us, and what could be the source of courage or boldness? At one time, I thought of myself as a dissident, and I wrote of things, and my texts were regarded as anti-Soviet. I criticized the government, but then time passed, perestroika came, the Soviet era ended, and some people told me, does it say that your life was spent or was wasted because we're now back to where you were? Well, I wrote some books which I hope would leave independently from these events or indeed the history. But I think that if every person has lived according to his principle, if he has not cheated, lied, if he has not practiced self-deception, if he has not been mean or low, then one might say that there will be a little trace from his life in some spheres, like like the small shadow of an airplane passing by a cloud, but we really none of us knows about the meaning or the sense of life. But if we believe that we have spent our life as humans, then we may find ourselves right.
Nikita Molchakov, Moscow. Many years ago I read your book about soldier Chunkin. And there was a wonderful phrase which would make us think now. You wrote that the most suspicious person is someone who brings no suspicions at all. Today, this phrase seems to be extremely vital, and the second thesis I would like to mention, your colleague from Simferopol thanked you. You mentioned we talked a lot about literature. So the Russian literature does exist because of you, Boris Akunin, as distinct from falsities in the Russian literature. So thank you very much. I would like to thank you for this. Do I have to answer that? Eduard Kamira from Bashkortostan. At our enterprise in the 50s, there was a very interesting case. The story from a genre. A person was late to work for 15 minutes. There was no transport. It was 1954 and 1955, and being late was a great violation. So he was criticized after work. How could you do it? How could you be late? And one of the participants of this gathering was tired and said, "Let us shoot him." And there was a big hall, it was totally quiet. And then there was some shoe in the hall, and people started saying, "No, let us not shoot him for this." Of course, he was punished, criticized. But I remember this case now, because this collective conscience, it saved this person now. Do you think that we can trust to this collective public conscience of our country, of Ukraine? Meaning that we shall be able to avoid something dangerous, something undesirable. We have no public conscience. Unfortunately, it is manipulated. In time of Stalin, when they said that someone was to be shot, the crowd shouted, "Yes, he has to be shot," and people applauded. He should be applauded like mad dogs when Bukharin or Rykov were convicted or sentenced. And I remember in Galileo a fairy tale when there was Galileo's personal case. I was a victim of such cases myself. I've had several individual cases, and I remember others when a group gathers, and you seem to know them very well. once was criticized. That was my personal case. And before that, I met one of my colleagues, a writer and a neighbor. He ran to me together with his wife in the underground. It was in Brezhnev time. And he said, I want to shake your hands. He said, Masha, come. This is this and that. And then it was my personal case. And they say about me that I'm an American spy or something like that. And this man was sitting here and he stands up. I thought that now he was going to protect me because he just a day ago said that he was happy to see me. And he started saying things about me. I was totally fascinated. I mean, surprised. That's how it worked. Some people voted in favor of something to show some loyalty. Others had some sins, and they were promised that these sins would be written off. There was a guy in the Union of Writers. He was the party secretary, and he stole the party money. And he was actively against dissidents, and this party money was forgotten. And some other people tried just to sit quiet. They were pulled away, and they were asked, Comrade Ivanov, what do you think about it? And he thought that he had a wife and children, and he said, I am also in favor of this and that. So how can you trust this kind of society? Today, Russia actually participates in war. 85% of the population are in favor. How can you trust this kind of population? There was a joke in the Soviet time, collective farmers, do you agree? And probably you don't agree. We don't agree, that's what they said. I have a question to you. In my time, there was a dialogue with another classic of ours, Alexander Solzhenitsyn. Could you briefly explain to the audience what was the gist of this dialogue? And I think this is the younger generation who doesn't know anything about it. Just tell us this story. I think that it's not so interesting for the younger generation, and in my time it was very passionate. Solzhenitsyn appeared in 1962 with his first book, One Day of Ivan Denisovich, and shook everybody, including myself, because it was the first book about Stalin's concentration camps, and it was ottepel time, which is thawing, and it was liberal situation at that time. But concentration camp and the topic of repression, it was prohibited. Khrushchev said something in the 20th century and denounced Stalin, but writers were not allowed to write about this, and suddenly there came a writer who wrote about it, and it was published. And everybody admired him. And now, we tend to bring idols, to make idols. So Solzhenitsyn was one of such idols. He was turned into an idol. Then he spoke a lot critically about the Soviet power. It was pretty dramatic, and people saw that he was the most truthful and courageous writer who was not afraid of anything. he wrote an article, Live Without Lies, and he wrote that the state is built on lies, and we all lie, and we have to change this picture. Otherwise, we held the state to be the way it is. I was also fascinated by him, but then I noticed some drawbacks in his views, in his behavior. At that time, you might be criticized severely if you criticized Solzhenitsyn. It's not the case now, of course. For instance, well, you can say that I don't like the story of Lev Tolstoy, but if you say I don't like the story of Solzhenitsyn, and I was said, how can you say things like that? Who are you? And what are you? And I decided that this is something to be made fun of. And I made a parody in my novel 2042. There is a guy, Sim Karnavalov, who reminds you of Solzhenitsyn, and his environment reminds you of the crowd. So his article, Live Without Lie, but then I saw that he himself lied. And he was pretty smart about it. So I disillusioned in this person, and I wrote a book, Portrait Against the Myth Background. So Solzhenitsyn played a very important role in my life, without any doubt. Alexei Kiriyenko from Ukraine, Kiev, mother of Russian towns. Nice to see you. And it is good to see someone physically, someone whose books you read. You said a nice thing for me. It's a pleasant stand. You are a citizen of Russia, and I'm a citizen of Ukraine. And speaking about Ukraine, you said in Ukraine. But of course, you are a linguist, a philologist, and Yelena Mikhailovna once said, I am going to talk in Ukraine because they like it. And I will be saying this. I have a small remark about this. While Ukrainians like in Ukraine, but when Russians go abroad, they return back to nature. But if they go to the Ukraine, they also go to their motherland, because after all, Russia was Kiev Russia. The Kremlin yoke made a lot to make a gap between our countries now. I feel it not at this school though. So what can be done by thinking people to bridge these gaps and to avoid spiritual offense, so to speak, and so that we are friendly people again? Well, you are intellectual people here. You just should understand, not necessarily intellectual people, there are simple folks, and they understand that whatever happens, it's not just people against people. It is something resolved by certain people, individuals, and the big countries have to suffer for proposing. I was a boy during the war. My father was at the front and he was wounded. He returned a disabled person. And he didn't like Germans to be called Germans. He preferred to call them fascists. They are not Germans, he said. And there were books by Edinburgh to kill a German. And that's how many times you see him, kill him as many times. All the Germans, it doesn't matter who is good and who is bad. Any German is fit to be killed. But people who have the conscience, they should understand it and they should promote it in the Ukraine. Of course, if people want me to say in, I don't mind at all. And it has nothing to do with the rules of the Russian language. Now Ukraine, on the Ukraine, it is just the tradition and nothing else. In the Ukraine is fine. So in the Ukraine there is also feeling of animosity like Moskals, Katsavs, Vatniks or Colorades and so on. And then there is a poem, We'll Never Be Brothers. It's a strong poem, but it is filled with hatred to Russians. So you have to fight against it. I, on my behalf, wherever I hear that the Ukrainians are bad, I say that you are bad. We through. This is the meeting with the classic. All right. Vladimir, I have to thank you once again on behalf of my own generation, which was influenced by you. And we followed your writing and human biography, writers and human biography. You can't imagine what time it was when we all heard that he had to emigrate. Because it's a thread, and when it is torn, it seems tragic. I thank Vladimir again, because now he is part of our expert community. And then if you do not mind, I would like to sum it up. Marina, Stepa will deliver you diplomas. And if any of you has something to say, let us do it near the pond. Near the pond. We'll make all our speeches not in the pond, not in the pond. Because I think that we are a little bit tired during these 7 days of work. We have to divert ourselves, distract ourselves, and then it will be fine. What I have to say now, I would like to quote Yuri Levada, who is our friend. In the 70s, not like Vladimir, but many people left for their children. Many people left and saved themselves and their children And that's the way it looked. It was in the 70s. And we said goodbye in our family. So the point was that it was for good. And that's how it was. That's the way we parted with our sick daughter. And this was really for good. And Yuri Levada, at one of such farewells, he said, your soul cannot hold it any longer. And he was someone who suffered a lot, who was criticized a lot as a scientist, as a human being. And Yuri Alexandrovich said, if your soul can't hold it any longer, that means that your soul is not big enough. So you should be filled with dignity, with proper environment. You should stick to your convictions. But there is something you cannot give up. Russian language, for instance, because this is our world, and that is very important. You should develop a Russian language. There's a great writer sitting next to me. And I have told you several times, I read it in Mandelstam or Akhmatova. So there was a phrase of Mandelstam anyway. At the head of this nation there is a great Russian language. And the history of the Russian people should be in line with the Russian language, because this language contains a fantastic sense, and you should have in mind the symbols of responsible freedom. Freedom also seems very important. We live among others, but if you do not press the freedom of somebody else, you are free. And our brains are critical, and our brains are capable of comparative analysis. And we can think critically. And of course, to act is also very important. Some people can do it. If you can't, so you shouldn't press upon this floor. You shouldn't step upon this floor. But if you feel that this is your vocation, then you should act in line with the way you understand your freedom, your language, containing history and yourself. And this is also important. You can't live in a society without morals and without actions. Absence of morals eats you like corrosion. Because for such people like myself, we may think about the end of our life, as Tolstoy said, if the death is senseless, then the life is senseless as well. All all these senses become very important. But only if you feel that this is your vacation, don't panic. Well, I often do panic myself. You'd rather not do anything than just panic and be desperate. And panic and desperation are caused by the absurdity, because you want more common sense. What the school has done and is going to do in its different capacities and modifications, and it did simple things, as a matter of fact. In this particular room, it built a symbolic space of intellectual discussion. And it happened on and on. Because the discussion is also a part of human activity, your mind should be critical. Not a single point of view was imposed here, because this is senseless. We are all free people, intellectually and spiritually. The point of view here, discussions in publicity and transparency does its best to develop your life. All the collective which is behind this work, we want you to stay with us. And you will increase our net of people who understand the importance of special accents. Although you all think differently, and if you stay with us and do it as your own acts, because it's interesting to you, then come back to our discussions, wherever they are held, here or abroad, in internet or in magazines. We are glad to see you everywhere. And I thank our experts who come here for one day in this kind of heat, or even longer than one day. Myself and you and all our collective, we thank you, because you were with us, you are with us, and these are not just fine words. You are part of the school. And the school continues with you, and I thank you. Lena said brilliant words, but I want to say something more earthly. I felt very good in this audience. The audience is smart and advanced and concerned by the civil affairs. Thank you for being invited. In a way, we think along the same lines. Truly, I am really thankful. In front of this audience, I felt quite at home. Thank you very much.